in developing the sort of organizational structure for this film, is this a structure that you use time and again on films, or is it something that you had to develop specifically for the complexity of this film, or a little bit of both?
I would say we developed this. I would say it's a little bit of both. I would say in tradition there when I just started working in industry, you obviously follow the most traditional way to do it. But when you encounter a project like this, the traditional way honestly probably not gonna work. So you're gonna have to improvise. And I would say this is definitely one of we improvise this, but the logic behind it, like how we organize it, is still the traditional way. It's just we added a little bit of things to make it more suitable for our project.
Okay.
Like I can ask Ashish to talk about more about this in terms of the actual production and how you organize it. So
Yeah.
Yeah, we had sound effects, and we had visual effects, and we had some graphics as well. So I think in our case we kept everything as separate projects within the production, instead of having them as individual bins within each project, so that with the production you can sort of just cross-reference media across all of the projects. So it was kind of easy to have things, to have one type of a certain thing in its own project. So we could always, if it's in a sequence, just right click on it, say reveal in project, and it'll open up the project that it's originally in. So we don't have to bring it into, the cuts project. We don't have to bring in the sound effects into the cut project. We could just leave it where it was.
So the thing that everyone's seeing right now, this is our main production. This is everything everywhere is a production window. So we break it down to these individual folders. Within each individual folders have Premiere projects in it. But we break it down into cuts, scenes, footage. So categorize each item as its own folder. And then if you jump into each folder, then you'll see we make it even smaller subfolders to even break down the materials. So the one on the right hand side, as everyone can see, these are actual individual Premiere projects. Like for example, under the sound effects, you have. So because we want to fully utilize the advantages of using production, which is you can cross-referencing and breaking stuff into smaller Premiere projects. So we would even separate the sound effects into categories. You can have a project only have all your restaurants, all your apartment sound effects, or your bagel restaurant. So when Paul's working, if he's looking for a specific sound effects, he can just open that project, and it'll be fairly quickly because there's not a lot of stuff in it.
And I'll say that once you get into the projects, that's anything goes. That's where the organization for me, like the ability to stay organized, is really nice side of things. But in the timeline, like I'm a mess. It's all. It's because I don't want to have to think about staying organized while I'm working. I just want to think about how can I get this idea out as quickly as possible. And a lot of times that means that I leave ideas on the timeline and I just disable them for now because I might come back to them or use them later. So there's a lot of disabled clips. There's a lot of just everything's all over the place. There's stacks of clips, 12, 15. Sometimes I'll have 40 clips stacked on top of each other of different options. So I just want to reiterate that being organized is great, but it's not a prerequisite for doing good work. And because I know that if I had seen this when I was in college, I'd be like, that's not possible for me. I cannot say that. I might as well find another career. And I don't want that to hold anybody back.
Totally. Yeah. So let's dive into more of the craft editing. I do want to start with a question from Cameron Scott, who asks, during the editing of Everything Everywhere All at Once, how much of the film's erratic structure was constructed in pre-production as opposed to post-production? To clarify, when cutting between universes and timelines, was each cut detailed in the script or storyboards, or was that more of an organic process in editorial?
Both. There was some stuff that's very clearly storyboarded and shot for things. You know, they would do whip pans that whip into another thing. But then we figured out ways to fake that if it didn't work and we needed to substitute. We also took a bunch of, we had to cut 40 minutes out of this film. So we took a bunch of universes out, which means that a lot of those transitions would get broken because we would pull out pieces, and so we would have to come up with new ways of doing things. And that was a fun challenge to like, okay, well then let's see, can we find a match on action that wasn't planned? Can Evelyn whipping her head back be used as a match on action? That was from a different scene and this was from a different scene, but we can throw them together. So it was both. And Dan and Daniel are they're not like, they don't have an iron grip on what they shoot. They just want it to be good. And they also love to be surprised. And so a lot of what I would do, so the first way that I cut a scene, so I read the script, think about it, and then I put it away for weeks or whatever. And then I get the footage and I cut the first cut of the scene without consulting the script at all, just based on what the footage is telling me. And so the first version of the scene usually is a little bit off from what was planned because it's based on my memory and it's based on, well, they shot it this way, they must have needed to adapt to whatever. So I will then go back, consult the script and say, oh, well, I cut this scene completely wrong. So I'm going to keep this version. I'm going to cut a script version. And then, I'm going to basically audition them both for them. And usually I send them my weird version first, which is like, hey, look at what I came up with. This is funny, or this is interesting, or sometimes it's funny because it's so wrong, But at least it just gives them something to respond to, and it can lighten the mood. And occasionally, like those moments that I find that aren't scripted are really useful, even if it's not for that scene. But just saying, oh wow, we can actually like the interjection of humor into this dramatic scene because you put a fart sound in the middle of it. Or whatever, is actually a really useful tool that we can use later on because there's a lull in the film at this point. So that's a really fun way to work, and it's fun to work that way with them because they are so excited about those surprises. And then we start combining things and actually working together on the scene. And there's a lot of we're for the most part off on our own working, so they don't sit with me a lot. I love sitting with them, but usually it's because I can't figure something out, or something's just not making sense to me, or I don't understand the intention of what they're trying to get across. Usually at the very end is when we all sit together in a room and we iron it to a perfect degree. So a lot of that stuff was improvised in the edit, and then some of it was beautifully scripted and shot and storyboarded, and then the VFX team did their incredible work.
Yeah, so I know that we have a couple of scenes from the film. Which one do you want to? I'd love to kind of give some insight into your process and how you guys work together to bring these scenes to life.
Do the dogfight one, because that has that was a big collaborative effort. So let's do the dogfight first. Great.
Let's roll that clip. Okay, so talk us through that scene. You said there was a lot of collaboration that happened.
Yeah, so those, specifically the dogfight scene was problematic from the beginning because I think they had budgeted, they're not budgeted, but they had scheduled 2 days to shoot that scene, and they got an afternoon, I think. They had to shoot the whole dogfight in the kitchen in an afternoon. Meaning they just Larkin threw a camera on his shoulder and just, they just started running around doing it. And so it was really messy. And we struggled with it, to try to figure out how to make it as good as it could be. And I took a pass at it. Dan and Daniel took a crack. I took another pass. We had, 5 versions of it. And I sent it over to my partner, Luke, who's not officially on the movie, but he loves Kung Fu movies. And I was like, here, just do your thing. I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm not going to show you a past version. I just want you to cut it from the ground up and see what happens. So there's these little moments that we ended up stealing. The dog hitting her chest, and then there being a literal sound effect of a breath, and then silence as she flies back. Like that was a Luke touch. and just little ways that he cut things that I could steal and just say, that makes this better, that makes this better. And then eventually we realized that one of the keys to it was just like, it was twice as long before. There was a lot more stuff that happens in there, and we just cut it down and made it really snappy. So that was a way of kind of using the collaborative process to just get to a place where it was good no matter who did it. Then when we get to the drum fight, we call him the drummer, the guy with he's the IT guy. That's who he is. That was another one where I had a version I thought was good. We thought it was pretty good, and we had Daniel wanted to send it to the Marshall Club. Get their thoughts on it. The Marshall Club is a stunt team, the coordinators and choreographers, and they're also the actors. So we sent it to them, and they were like, pretty good. It's fine. You can push it way more, right? You can speed it up 2 times more than you are. You could cut time here, you cut this here, cut that here. And it's like it's hard to hear that when you are feeling, especially when you're feeling really good about something. But I have a philosophy of I do every single note, no matter how much I disagree with it or how much I think it might not work. I'm just going to try it, because oftentimes I'll get a bad note from a person I don't like. Not the Marshall Club or people I don't like. I love the Marshall Club guys. But a producer on a music video will give a note, and I'm like, this guy sucks. I don't like him. I think he's bad ideas. I could just discount that. But 1 out of 20 times, I'll do that note and be like, man, it's a good note. It made it better. It did, it might not have made it better for the reasons they thought it would, but like, you can't ever discount an idea just because you don't agree with that. You have to try everything. So I tried every single thing that they told me, and like 90% of them were great notes, and then allowed us to reevaluate all the other fight scenes and say, all right, let's see how far we can push these now. Let's see what we can get away with. And so that was another way of collaborating, even though they weren't in the edit with us, but just opening it up and saying, and this is an important part of our process too, is every 2 weeks, once we have a cut of the film, every 2 weeks we screen it for somebody. 4 or 5 people, random people, friends of friends, maybe like Larkin, the DP, came in and watched, and he gave the same note. He was like, this fight seems too slow. So screening it, getting feedback, and actually not just counting that feedback offhand, because 1, you think it's not going to work, but 2, you might be thinking it's not going to work because you were tired. You don't want to do it. You don't want to open up the bag again because you're afraid of just what it might lead to. And that's like so dangerous. To get to a point where it's just good enough is not good enough. Like, it can't be just good enough. It can't be just to the point where it's working. The point is, for me, the point isn't to make it as good as it can be. The point is to make it great. Because you can always I made it as good as it could be based on the footage. And like, you could have figured out a way probably to make it even better. And you just have to, like, a big part of that is feedback and bringing other people in. Like if Daniel's grandma was in town, she walked by and she said that scene could use this or that, like, I would roll out my chair and put her on the keyboard.
And so I know that the collaborative process that you were talking about earlier, that you guys use at Parallax, you call swarm editing. Is that something that came into play in this?
It did. I mean, that was like in that scene for sure. Luke was part of the swarm. Dan and Daniel are always part of the swarm. And anyone else. I'm trying to think if we had anyone else just jump in randomly. I mean, Zoe was cutting. You did versions of some of the scenes, especially in the laundromat at the end with Gong Gong. So anybody can be a part of the swarm. The great thing about the swarm too is that on other projects that we work on, I work on a project called Black News with Khalil Joseph. We do occasionally, we'll just bring in someone who's not an editor and we'll teach them Premiere in a day and just say, go, see what you can come up with. Here's a bunch of footage. And so you can bring in like a fine artist or a painter or a photographer or, there's a woman who's a color correction person who just has a really cool sensibility, and we love her sensibility. So she comes in and edits. And so it allows you to do that and just get these, sometimes they're really rough ideas, but you can tell they're good ideas. And you can say, they don't have the tools yet to refine that, but I could not have come up with that idea on my own. And that's way more valuable than being smooth and technical. We've all seen like work, whether it's like graphic work, visual work, songs that are recorded on someone's cassette in a basement that don't sound like studio quality, but they're, like Daniel Johnston's songs or something. They're really emotional, they're really beautiful. And that's more valuable than like a really polished thing that you came up with that's not as good of an idea. But that's, I think, the advantage of the swarm is like, if you guys are working on something and your roommate who's majoring in something else has an idea, like either have them sit with you and do the ideas, they tell you how to do it, or like show them how to do it and give them an hour on the computer. Like that's just, you're not going to get any more interesting ideas than that.
So Zoe, what is your approach, like being part of the swarm? Like when you come in, how do you approach it?
Well, my initial idea was terrified because we were remote, and I was like, oh my goodness, there's so many projects needs to organize.
Always back to organization for Zoe.
No, but yeah, so Paul was asking me to take a stab at the laundromat at the very end because the language and everything. So I just I remember I just put it together the way I think is probably the most emotional way, and then I just handed over to Paul. And I do believe he used one of the take I chose, which I'm very happy.
Yeah, there were a lot of the time it was, Zoe was like this. There was a scene in particular where Zoe was like, this, watching the raw footage made me emotional. And I was like, well, okay, if I cut the scene now and she doesn't have that same reaction, bad sign. And I actually don't think that it did have the same reaction. But she would go in sometimes and be like, the way that, Gong Gong said this line is really great. And the way that he said it here isn't as beautiful. So that stuff is really valuable. And even, we say this a lot at Parallax when you're working with us for a lot of the younger editors, because they'll come in, they'll work in the swarm, they'll do work for 6 weeks. And when they watch the final thing, it seems like we haven't used anything that they've given us. And they can get, discouraged. But kind of what I was hinting at earlier, sometimes seeing the approach that someone has taken with a scene won't be right for that scene, but will inform us on, wow, that's a really interesting way to rethink the footage, or it's a really interesting way to approach that character. We should use that for the rest of the film. So sometimes these scenes that they do that don't work can actually be a huge influence on the way that the entire project ends up coming together. And it's hard to explain that stuff, but everyone who's part of the swarm, even if your ideas don't make it A to A onto screen, those ideas are always influencing. And even just sometimes having people around with different ideas makes us view things differently, having different perspectives. Like, it's not good to have everyone with the same background and the same age who has the same experiences and came up in the same schools working on a project, because it's just going to turn out there's a limited window in the way that it's going to. So it's nice to have older people, younger people, people from other countries, just anyone sitting in and changing the way that you even look at footage.
It's interesting what it makes me think about too, especially for younger people or people who are sort of just starting out, that one of the scariest pieces is actually starting to share your work with other people, like showing your work to others and getting feedback or getting people's perspectives. Why is that an important part of the process?
Yeah, it's very scary. It's also like, it doesn't require this, but it's helpful when you can do it with people that you trust. Why it's important, I think, to find people whose work you respect and show them stuff that you know is bad and say, look, I know this is bad. I need your help figuring out why. Or I think this is working. I think it could be better. And that kind of stuff is really useful. And it's a huge, because the ultimate thing is at the end of your project, you're going to share it with everyone in the world. So why would you not try to share? If you can do that easily, why can't you share it with 4 people, first. For people part is a little scarier because they're looking right at you and they're saying, hey, I see the way that I see all the mistakes you've made. I see all the stuff that's unpolished. And I struggle with that. I still struggle. Whenever I play a cut for people, my heart's still pounding, and why didn't they laugh when they were supposed to laugh? And like, you ask them questions afterwards. Did you get that this woman was that person's grandma? And they're like, I had no idea. You're like, God, I thought I made it so obvious. And also learning to give feedback that's productive and kind is really, really a good skill to have. And I think if you can model that for other students, and I think especially to the teachers who are here, like being able to model productive, sometimes non-prescriptive feedback, saying this part of this isn't working, and I don't know exactly what the solution is, but like this is not working for me. That can be really valuable versus like, here's what you need to do to fix it. Because like I said, like more than half the time, those initial prescriptive ideas to fix things are usually not right. Those are like really valuable skills to have, I think.
Yeah. I know, so you mentioned earlier about how you're a mess, and I think you were maybe willing to share your project and sort of show people the timeline.
A little bit. I was like re-plugged in the drive before this, so let me see. Trying to find some of my messy. The problem is that Zoe would go in and clean up my project sometimes, which is great. But so like this looks fairly organized now. But usually it's like, I'll have a bunch of stuff just like stacked and all over the place, and this clip is disabled, and but let me see if I have any others. So like this is the elevator scene, and you see there's a lot of disabled stuff. There's ideas that are kind of like left on the timeline. This would have been like an alternate angle that I thought maybe we cut to the frontal angle for that, or like maybe we cut to the close up here. And so I'll leave those there as ideas to revisit later. Lots of like songs that I ended up not using that I have disabled, and I can just enable or re-enable.
Wow.
With the Matrix soundtrack as temp score. So yeah, these aren't as messy as they get, but they are.
And these are just individual scenes, not even the whole film.
Yeah. So initially, the way that we broke it down was by scenes. So we'll have laundromat kind of movements, right? Laundromat, IRS movement or a location. And then eventually you go into Reels, start working in Reels. Right now is a mess. And then, we have our like current cut, which always holds the most recent version. So this is, locked cut, most recent version. Deleted scene, locked and cleaned, all the Reels in there.